prepared for the next step.
So that plan B was very helpful in that, and Monica, that support that was kind of floating around. So kind of taking little notes here of some of these supportive factors that can help when it ultimately comes time to retirement, which we're definitely going to get to. Greg, early draft picked, #1, killing it at Ohio State, similar as Josh. Retirement, what were your thoughts and feelings about that?
Well, since I worked out today on the court, I didn't quite retire.
My man.
No, it's one of those, for me, it was a little different because I never thought this was going to be over. I thought I was going to keep on playing, and you never really look at the end while you're playing. But, you know, when you see it, it's like, oh, gosh, did I really prepare? And it kind of caught me off guard. You know, I went a whole month really without talking to people, without knowing what I'm doing. To me, it was just a whole month of wake up, what are you going to do today? I don't know. Walk outside, work out. I don't know what I'm going to do tonight. And it's really a whole bunch of loss for me until you really get that support. And for me, it was calling Coach Mata and just realizing that I needed to do something with my life. And that's when he gave a branch. He was like, just come here to the gym, watch practice, be around guys. And that really helped me out to give me some direction, give me some meaning every morning.
Great, great. Again, a huge support that you were able to reach out to. Prem, did retirement sneak up on you, and how are you feeling about the inevitability of that?
Yeah, I mean, retirement was pretty clear for me because my junior year I had 3 consecutive surgeries. So I had shoulder and both knees in 3 consecutive months. So it was pretty clear that my career was ending shortly. On paper, I think if anybody looked at me and looked on the surface, they said, oh, you know what, Prim made that transition completely fine. You know, by my junior year, I decided I wanted to be in sports broadcasting. And then 3 months after I graduated, I got a job at a television station. But if you had asked me at 25, you know, how do you feel about retirement? I'd say, you know what, it's fine. I'm done with tennis. At 30, I would have been like, you know what, I'm done. At 38 now, though, I realize now that I was not prepared for the emotional turmoil and journey of coming to the grips of leaving sport. You know, I think that athletes we're very conditioned to just suppress our emotions and be tough and stick it out and go on the quarter field and be a robot. And I think that can become problematic in real life because it's really important to acknowledge those feelings and heal. And that's not something that I didn't do. So, you know, around, I would say 31, 32 years old, I realized that I had been carrying a huge weight on my shoulders of not really being, to be honest and frank, not happy with how my career ended because it happened so quickly, you know, and you're like, I spent my entire life training and trying to be the best tennis player or football player, basketball player, and then you're like, did I do enough? Did I accomplish enough? And then, you know, you have all these questions. So, you know, I think my advice to a lot of people is like, just know that there's going to be an actual grieving process. You know, loss is loss, and it's I don't want to liken it to death, but it did feel like there was a part of me that died. And so it's normal to go through those feelings of sadness and anger and regret and guilt and all those things.
Well, since you brought up the reality of kind of this grieving process and emotions, I think that's when things get obviously the most deep, because this being athletics is something that is so ingrained in us as a part of our identities. From a very young age, we got substantial reinforcement from it, from coaches, from parents, from newspapers. And so when that's gone, where does that reinforcement now come from? So much of that has been external, and now we have to find a way to have it more internal. So speaking to those emotions, what types of feels did you all experience go as you went through this process of transitioning and retirement? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think Prim just really hit the nail on the head. At first, for me, I was just kind of numb to it.
I was just like, this is just going to be normal. This is my life now. And then, like I said, like once I saw the new swimmers coming in, that's when it really hit me. And you do experience like the loss and hurt, and you just feel like you are lost inside. And like she said, you know, as an athlete, you're ingrained to shut up and work, you know. And so that's what I did for a while. I was like, this is not an issue. You know, I can carry this burden and just live about my life. And like I very quickly learned that I couldn't. And that's when I would find myself like at night just like super lost and sad. And I was like, okay, why am I feeling so sad? Why do I feel so lost? And what do I need to do to keep going? And that's like why I said talking with people and just realizing that there are other people that are going through the same feelings, and other people that are retiring from sport that are going through the same thing. And if you don't talk about it, you don't know that people are also feeling that same way. So I think just being open about it has really helped me to heal. And I don't feel like I have finished like my healing process since leaving athletics, but it certainly helps me to be open about it and be like, look, whoever I'm talking to, this is how I'm feeling. I feel a little bit lost in myself, and I feel like I don't have a directional path. And just being able to be open about that, people can give you ideas or help you kind of circumnavigate the situation.
Josh?
Yeah, it's interesting that shut up and work thing. I think it's really, that's the real part about it. So when I first stopped playing, one of the first things I did was I went out of town. I went to Mexico just to kind of clear my head and, you know, think about what the next steps were, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of a way for me to disconnect from things for a little bit. But at the end of the day, you gotta answer the question about how you truly feel. And I think the part that makes that most real and the toughest thing about that is when I first stopped playing, the question everybody would ask is, are you still playing? And then you say no, and they ask you why, and then you go through all of that. So every time somebody would ask that question, that would bring up all the emotions inside that I was feeling about retiring from sports. And so that's tough. But the other thing, which is wild, is that emotional relationship that I learned from sports, like it leaks into other relationships that you have. So, you know, with your significant other, you feel like you're not as open as other people generally would be because, you know, football players, you're tough guys. Like, you're not supposed to be sad. If you have a bad day at work, it doesn't matter. Like, you know, just get through it, go back to work, next day is the next day, not to harp on all those things. So for me, one of the hardest things in general is being open about emotions and dealing with them, but especially when it comes to talking about something I hold so near and dear, where, you know, I've played football more falls in my life than I haven't played football thus far. It's really hard to kind of open up those wounds sometimes and really talk about it, but something that I need to do.
Great. Anything else?
Yeah. Can I get rated R or what?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Ohio Union is where the party happens. There is a bar in here, so if you get rated R, you get rated R. I think it's 21 and over in here anyway.
No, because she had mentioned numb, and I remember throughout the summer, after I got done playing in China, I want to say it was February, by the time I got back, I probably drank every day. So basically numbed myself to even get those feelings about how it was that, you know, it was over. You know, I'm not coming back. I'm not playing no more, or no team wants to look at me right. And then that, again, is messing up because I'm drinking every day. So even if somebody did see me, they're like, I don't even know if I want to speak to him right now. So I kind of isolated myself with the alcohol and staying away from people, knowing that, okay, you were the #1 pick, but the second pick is the best player in the world right now. You know, well, besides Brian. But, I mean, it does get to you, but then you just keep on just numbing yourself and just try not to think about it until you find some direction.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, Greg, because that is a reality that a lot of athletes face. If we've never been in a situation where we've had to effectively process our emotions, what do we know what is easy for us? Well, we know it worked on a Friday night going down here, so maybe that's something that I'll continue to turn to in my life as well. Other folks experience, maybe not necessarily the alcohol use or anything, but other ways of just kind of numbing or avoiding the situation in your particular way.
I definitely did. So, I mean, to me, in my opinion, everybody has a different coping mechanism, right? You know, for Greg, it was alcohol. For me, it was eating. So I had developed an eating disorder, ironically, as a result of an injury when tennis was taken out of my life at 18 years old. And it kind of fluctuated when I was in college, but it really reared its ugly head when I left sport. Because now I was like, you know, as an athlete, you can judge yourself by how much you practice, whether you lifted, how much you trained, wins, losses, who I beat. And then now I went into the real world and I was like, I have no idea how to judge myself, and I have no idea how to place value on this person who, you know, when people ask, what are you? And, you know, you're like, well, I was a student athlete, but I'm not anymore. I guess I'm just prim. And in my head, even though I know I shouldn't have thought that, it wasn't enough. So to be honest, you know, I battled it for a good 10 years, and around the age of 31, I was like, you know what? I can't fix this myself. I know that what I did in my teens and 20s is not something that I can continue if I want to become a healthy and better individual. And so that's what I need to do. So it took 6 to 7 years of therapy to really fix that.
Wow. Good for you.
So for me, it was one of the interesting things. Like, I stopped playing ball, and I was going to the gym regularly, and then after a while, I just stopped. So there was probably like a 3-month period where I just didn't work out at all, because I'm sitting there like, all right, well, if I'm not playing ball, like, what am I really working out for? So that kind of took me out of my routine. And then you know how it goes, like, you don't start your day off on your routine, and then you feel shitty the rest of the day. And so you're just kind of going through it's almost like you're grabbing at things to try to feel good. So for me, I think probably one of the biggest things was, like, that sucked. Probably, like, legitimately gained 15 pounds doing that, but then it's everything else. Like, now you're out of your routine, so you have a bad day. But like I said, I'm not an emotional guy, so I'm not going to talk about my bad day. And so those things start to build up. So the hardest thing for me was trying to figure out what routine was going to work and how to put myself in that mode to where I'm not going to wake up depressed, I'm not going to skip my workout, I'm not going to skip my routine, I'm going to get up and I'm going to hit the ground running.
Monica, anything else to add?
Yeah, I would agree with Josh. The same thing, like, you lose your routine. Like, I knew every day I was going to wake up at 6, work out, I was going to go to class, and then do my homework. And that was boom, boom, boom every day. I knew that's what I was going to do. And when you lose that sense of routine, like you're saying, you're like, okay, why does it even matter? Like, if I go to the gym, it doesn't. But then you realize, like, over time that it's more about just, like, keeping yourself happy and keeping yourself mentally, like, sane and happy. And that it doesn't have to be a 4-hour workout anymore. I think that was really hard for me to try and realize, is that I don't have to be in the pool for 6 hours anymore, you know? I can do an hour just running, or I can, you know, go play sand volleyball with my friends, and that's, like, just as good now. And I think I didn't really express, like, any emotional abuse or eating disorder, but I felt a lot of guilt and a lot of anger. I felt guilty being mad and being sad about being retired. Because I think I was, like, thinking in my head, like, there are so many bigger issues in this world than me not being an athlete anymore. So I felt guilty about being mad and upset about that. And then I would get very angry when I was seeing people, like, competing or, like, going to championships. And I'm like, I want to do that still, but I can't. I don't have the opportunity to do that at Ohio State anymore. So just feeling that, like, guilt and anger just really, you know, gets to you. So, yeah, that was kind of what I felt after I retired.
Oh. So much rich stuff even coming from these 4 individuals that I think offers a really great microcosm or metaphor of how individuals in general are going to respond. So there's 4 individuals here and you're getting 4 different responses. That permeates throughout the entire athletic culture of each individual is going to handle retirement a little bit differently. And just as a little bit of a coaching point, when they're speaking about this kind of grieving process, one, I want to really hold an asterisk to process. It's not like you spend a week in X stage and then you move on to Y stage and then the next thing you know you're feeling good about it. It really is a process that kind of spirals in and out. And you might think you're smooth sailing and the next thing you know you're watching a basketball game and you see KD dunk and you're like, shit, and you right back to that kind of feeling, though maybe it's a little bit more temporary than what it was before. It can sneak up on you. And those emotions often associated with the grieving process, and I'd be curious to just get a raise of hands from the panel as I speak to each one of those. If you've felt this particular emotion, it's DABDA, okay? D stands for denial. This isn't actually over, okay? A stands for anger. Are you kidding me? This is over. I'm so pissed off. Pissed off at myself, pissed off at other people. Yep. Bargaining, which is, oh man, if I could just get one more play, one more snap, one more meet, one more match. D stands for depression, so just sad about the reality that it's been time to retire. And then eventually, occasionally, and then hopefully the majority of the time, acceptance, in times of acceptance that this is okay. I get to have the opportunity to begin a new chapter. Yeah. So right before your very eyes, you saw this process kind of unfold of these different emotions that can come up. So this change of mindset from when you were an athlete to now what is appropriate for you as an adult, and maybe a less athletic, maybe a more athletic adult. How have you gone about changing that mindset of maybe less is more, or maybe now I don't have to hit the gym as much, or maybe my routine can look a little bit differently and I'm valuing some other things as an adult than maybe what I did as an athlete? This mindset change is just kind of bringing some curiosity within me. So however it hits with you, I'd be curious to hear about your own thoughts about mindset change.
For me, I was very, very strict as an athlete, so I followed my routine. I was up at a certain time, I was asleep by a certain time, didn't go out on weekends, didn't drink, etc. And so retirement has brought a little bit of the fun back in terms of my schedule can be variable and I can hang out with friends and I can go have a few drinks and not feel guilty about it. And so I think that's one of the more valuable things now. You know, I'm still about to turn 25 this month, so I'm still a young guy. There's still a lot of fun to be had. So I get to enjoy that a little bit more, whereas, you know, I look back on my college days when I was playing in the league, and at times I feel like I wasted some good moments not spending time with friends and hanging out because I was so, you know, had a one-track mind about achieving my dream of playing in the NFL. So I think that's one of the good things that's happened.
For me, I think it's recognizing what I enjoy. Now I have a 2-year-old baby girl, so my time that I really enjoy that was going out partying is spent at home running around the house with her. I think about like the times I used to work out. Mine was always just on the schedule. You know, it was, I would have fun, but everything was on the schedule. As long as I got this done, then I can do this. And now it's taking out the big chunk of the sport is hard to fill up that time. My family does a great job of that now, but when I didn't have them, it was a lot of open time, a lot of time to think to myself, think positive and negative, mostly negative. But now with my family, it kind of put some things in perspective and made me realize I need to realize who I am and what I like outside of that sport, because once that's gone, that's most of your life.
Monica, you kind of spoke to the mindset shift. Prim?
You know, I've gone through different phases. I think after college, I was really sick and tired of tennis. I think primarily because I was really unhappy with how things ended. So I enjoyed the freedom. And then there was a period where I just got into a rut, and I went to the gym and did the elliptical for an hour, and that was my way of getting that athletic energy out. And then today, I think I'm a gym rat, and I will always be a gym rat. So that drive to be in the gym and sweat and push my physical limits will never go away, and that's something that I realize. And I feel like you don't have to shed your athlete identity. It's just going to look differently than what you have always known. You know, so you may not always, I'm not going to go out and play matches or be training for 4 or 5 hours, but I can improve my strength. I can improve my my flexibility. I can do yoga. I do boxing. I did Muay Thai for a couple years and tried to, you know, get my black belt. You know, you just have to get creative and find different goals. You know, and I think that's really worked for me. But it's also, I think what's helped is my husband, who was a trainer, a lot of my friends who are in sports, and they do CrossFit and everything, and just seeking their help and trying to figure out ways to shift your focus, especially for me with my eating disorder and my history, shift my focus away from anything that could get me back in trouble. Say like, okay, let's prove your strength or whatever. So
I think one of the toughest things of when you're going through something or feeling some type of way is taking the steps to do something about it. And I'm sure that there's individuals in this audience who have found themselves in situations that are tough, or maybe you're in a situation that's tough right now, whether an athlete or non-athlete, career-wise or not, and how to make those steps and what do those steps look like to get yourself on the other end of that struggle. And what's been apparent hearing you all talk is there was moments. There was a month of drinking every single day. There was an eating disorder that was developed. There was getting off of your routine and no longer exercising. And then eventually something happened, or some things happened, to start righting that ship a little bit. And I'm curious, because maybe there may be some takeaways for the audience here. For you as individuals, what helped set those dominoes in motion, and what were those key influences that started getting that train going down the right track?
Well, for me, it was just going back to the gym, getting back around basketball, seeing the kids come in and realizing this is a game that I love. You know, I can't be out here drinking every day or show up around them with alcohol on my breath or with it coming out my pores. So I had to start being better. I had to start getting myself together just to be around them, to be a better example, because I don't want anybody to look at me that type of way, or for me to influence them, and then for me to see it and somebody tell me, yeah, he's been idolizing you, but now he's not doing anything because he's drinking, and he's not a good person because he's seen that from me.
I want to hold that's awesome, Greg. I want to hold a magnifying glass to it just for a second, because I think from apartment or condo to gym, at the time and where you were at in life, probably felt like 1,000 million miles away, right? How did you make that determination of, I'm not going to sit here anymore, I got to go into the gym? How did that happen?
A lot of crying, a lot of old YouTube clips, and KD. I'm watching KD just ball out, and it's like, dude, I still feel like I can do something, and I didn't know I was gonna do it myself. I didn't know I was gonna I know I couldn't keep playing, but I knew I could use what basketball has gotten me to pass it on, just to be around it. So started seeing that in just the time going by. And also I had to stop drinking. I didn't have a eating disorder, but I became bulimic. I don't know if it was because I was drinking all the time, but I knew whenever I ate something, I knew how to throw it right back up. So it was a lot of negative going on with my health, with my mental. And then at that point, I was just like I got to get out this house. It was a lot of me, but it was a lot. Coach Mata, my mom calling me, my grandmother calling me, coming to visit. I had friends that would make sure I just couldn't stay inside the house, and I was thankful for them all the time because they got me to that place.
Awesome. So that mix of kind of these motivational clips that you started seeing and taking in, and then that support system that just wouldn't let you down. They just kept poking at you.
Well, I was down. They pulled me up.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, nice. Monica?
I think a really pivotal moment for me, kind of in my grieving process. I don't even know if she knows this. Dr. Bandy. She's one of my professors in undergrad. And yes, give her a round of applause because she's amazing. It was in the fall, and I was just having a really hard week, watching the girls here train, and just kind of in my feelings, like you say. And I was walking through the office, and she saw me. She's like, "Miss Velasquez, yeah, come in." I was like, "All right, here we go." And she sat me down, and she's like, "How are you doing, like, with retirement?" And I just, like, no one had really asked me how I was doing with it, and that was a moment for me where I was like, I really am feeling all these emotions, and they're really strong, and they're really taking over me. And that was the first time I realized, like, I have to do something about this. I have to talk about it, and I have to find ways to make myself happy and enjoy sport and enjoy my life after retirement. So thank you, because it really helped me move on in my grieving process.
Wow. You never know the impact that you're going to have on individuals, right? And at that time and in that place, it was that person that really was a key figure. Great. Josh?
So one day I was getting ready for an appointment, so I was getting dressed. I put my dress pants on. They were a little snug. And so I went and I looked in the mirror, and I'm just looking at myself like, damn, I'm a little bit doughy right now. And like, it's kind of bad to say, but like I'm vain. Like, I like to look good. And I was just like, okay, this is, at some point it's going to get out of hand. And when football players retire, there's like this joke, like the big guys get little and the little guys get big. And I was like on the cusp of a little guy. I'm like, I'm not going to become one of the big guys. So it just, like, it became a point where I had to tell myself enough is enough. Like, you can sit there and feel sorry about yourself and get out of your routine, but you're going to feel like a sack of crap, and then you're going to look like one too. Or you could just get your mind right and get back into it. So that kind of was it for me. Like, I'm not going to go around feeling dumpy and looking dumpy at the same time. It's just not going to happen for me like that.
Those snug pants. It's a wake-up
Bad
call.
deal.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Prim.
You know, I think I realized that I could take the lessons that I learned from sports and shift it over into real life. So, you know, I realized that I needed help. Just like Greg said, the support system is really huge. So I knew I needed to heal, and I knew that I needed help. So that came from my family, my friends, and also a therapist. You know, in my head, I was like, listen, we go to school, we have teachers, we have sports, we have coaches. So why can't we have a life coach to help us become better people? And that really helped me heal and make that turn. And then, you know, I really started using that same mindset to become a better person. So I was like, okay, if I don't have sports in my life and I can't really become a better athlete at this point, why don't I work on becoming a better person? And that's when my perspective on what identity really is started to change and shift. And I realized, I was like, you know, tennis will always be a part of my identity, but it's not who I am. And I think had someone told me that, and there's a lot of people that will say that to athletes, but had someone said that to me at 18 years old, I don't think I would have understood it. Even at 30 years old, I don't know if I would have really understood it, but now I do. And so I think that's really helped fuel my motivation, is when I get up, I do everything that I can to become just a better person. So because I don't have structure in my life anymore without tennis, so I get up at 5 in the morning, I journal, I get my emotions out, write some ideas, my goals, whatever, and then I meditate for 10 minutes. I also do a lot of mental imagery about what I want to do, where I see myself going, and I've read a ton of books, and I think that's helped put me on the track towards becoming a better person and continuing that process of healing.
Well, you bring up a really good point about the certain behaviors and activities that for you promote wellness. And I'm curious, I'm very curious from the rest of the crew, because we do different things to encourage wellness within ourselves. So Josh, how do you maintain wellness now?
Yeah, so that visualization part is big. You know, I like to get up and kind of map out my day. What is it going to look like? What are my successes going to be like? And how am I going to attack my challenges? So that's been huge. But one thing I actually picked up rather recently, I went to the radio station to do a spot, and so I was doing my show prep, and I sat down in one of the studios that was vacant, and I closed the door, and those things are soundproof. And it was like almost so quiet that I could hear my heart beating in there, but it was really good because I have so much in my life going on, so much to stimulate me, that I probably needed that time to just be kind of by myself, where it's quiet, where I can just be with my thoughts. And so that meditation piece as well, just being able to sit there for 10 minutes and not do a ton and just be with your thoughts and kind of, you know, let the things happen in your mind, you know, figure out a way to map it out, etc., or just sit there and not do anything and not think about anything, has been really helpful. But probably the biggest piece for me is reconnecting with family, because I've been a big family person, but it seemed like when I left the sport, I kind of disconnected from that a little bit too. And so getting right and spending time with my younger brother and spending time with my parents has been huge.
being completely transparent, I don't know if I found that balance yet. I mean, I'm just a year out, so I'm still trying to figure out what's going on in my life. But I think as far as like schedule and day-to-day routine, once I finished synchro, I overdid it. I was like, I have all this time, and I need to find like an activity to fill every single minute of that day. And I overdid it. I joined way too many things, took on way too many projects. You know how it goes. So I think part of that process for me is learning how to say no and find a balance where I can do things right and do them well, while also being able to have time for myself and do things that I like to do. And one of our friends, that graduated from our synchro program, she's becoming a registered dietitian. And one of her big things that she is speaking on is finding joyful movement. And I think that's something really big for athletes, is you don't have to do activity that you don't want to do. And I think I get into that cycle of gym. I'm like, why am I on the treadmill? I don't really like running that much. So just finding something that I actually enjoy and that will like bring me that peace of mind during the day.
Yeah, that's great. Doing activity without feeling like you're engaging in physical activity is very cool. And Greg, any additional wellness tips?
So I want to say about 5 years ago, I went 6 months sober. It was a long time at the time, but it put some things in perspective and helped me attack life a little bit differently. And now I try to get up and ride the bike at home for 20 minutes and watch the highlights, either SportsCenter or NBA Game Time, just to see basketball, keep my mind around it. But then my daughter comes running down, and wellness for me is when I see her and realize that she's a sponge. So I need to be the best person I can be so she can see that and she can realize, that's what a man's supposed to be. This is what a woman's supposed to be, and we need to be happy and we need to be good people. And she is a sponge.
Oh, yeah. Boy, the ultimate accountability right there.
Last night, she ran into the room and said, Greg, pick me up because Mom told me if I don't, she's going to spank my ass. And my wife was asleep. So I'm still wondering where that came from. So
that's real talk right there, right? We all need an ass spank every once in a while, don't we, folks? That might be a different convention, but nevertheless. Wrapping up kind of the individual based, and then I want to kind of macro it out a little bit, zoom out a little bit, because this is a sport and society. So we don't want to let society off the hook, because we got some words for society as far as athletics is concerned. But just quickly kind of identifying what's been awesome about retirement, because there is two sides of every coin, and I know we like to present a particular picture because it can be challenging and it can also be pretty awesome. And certainly if I would have said that the best years of my life were between 2000 and 2004, I would be crazy, because as you might imagine, as a 37-year-old with a man bun, life is pretty good right now, okay? Do not lose any sleep for your pal Dr. Grafe, okay? So, but I'm just curious, kind of around the horn, what's been some salient, really important pieces for you? And Greg, start off. What's been awesome about retirement?
The time. Just the time and the no pressure. I used to go to every game I ever played, and I would just be nervous. I would get butterflies before every game. And so now it's funny because some days it'll happen around 5 o'clock, and I'll just be nervous for some reason. That's because the games are at 7, so around 5 o'clock I'm like, oh gosh, what am I gonna do? But now, most of the days, I'm like, oh, I'm about to take me a nap.
That's good. Naps are good, yeah. Monica.
I'd have to echo that. The time is really amazing. You get to spend time with your family, go on trips with your friends. So it's been really great in the healing process also, just to be able to spend that time with people that you really love. And then also just getting to take the skills that you learned in sport out into the real world. So that's been something that I've been very appreciative, is that I have all these great skills that I've picked up from my teammates, from my coaches, from my sport, and I'm able to share that with people that I work with now or kids that I work with. So I think that's pretty special.
I would say a similar thing. What's been really fun is my new career. I can be competitive. Trying to find the listing, trying to find your buyer client the best home, etc. has been fun for me, because now I get to be competitive in a different way. It's it's just really, I think it's just like Greg said, you just feel more relaxed. You feel like you can do fun things. You feel like you can spend time now. If you go off schedule, you go off schedule. Like, it ain't that big a deal. So that's been really cool for me. And then probably the final thing, which I really enjoyed, when I was playing, I started a charity. We work with kindergarten through 8th graders, and now I get to spend more time around the kids, which is a really big passion of mine. I'm coaching track as well, so I get to spend some time around high schoolers every day, just teaching lessons and learning from them, because I'll tell you what, spending time around some kids will teach you some things too. So that's been a ton of fun for me.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that everybody said. You just have more time. You get to explore new interests and try new things, spend time with family and friends. I think a lot of athletes' social lives and familial relationships take a huge hit because we have to be kind of selfish to excel at what we're doing. But I think I would also add that, you know, you reached a high level in sports, and it doesn't have to end there. You can reinvent yourself, and you can evolve, and you can progress and make new moves and shifts. You know, when I quit tennis, I thought that was kind of the end of maybe an elite level of some sort. And then I got into sports broadcasting, and then, you know, I got on air, and then I went to ESPN and got to host SportsCenter and all these things that I had aspired to do in college. And we started Spain and Prim, which was the first ever all-female radio show in broadcasting history. And now I'm making a career shift. And there are just these new goals and new things that you can do with your life. And in the smaller picture, it might seem like, well, you know, what else is here? What else is after this? But your biggest gift or achievement or greatest realization may be yet ahead, you know, whether it's 5, 10, 20, 40 years down the road. So I would just encourage people that don't be afraid to just turn the page and start a new chapter.
Seems as though that the way out of such an obsessive kind of arena is through diversification and exploring new things. So it's kind of ironic that such sole focus and laser focus, how you get away from that is through that diversification, which it sounds like you all are doing. So shifting gears a little bit, let's zoom out a bit. And obviously this is titled Sport and Society. And so culture is something that's kind of bubbling up in me. And I want to leave that vague enough to allow the panelists to kind of speak to how culture, and the way that you want to choose to talk about culture, impacts your integration in sport and your retirement as you see fit. So I'm just going to kind of leave culture open-ended a bit, and whoever wants to get started with that bomb of a question, feel free to do so.
I guess I would look at it in society as being an ex-#1 pick and playing in the NBA. I felt I came here that I need a big house, I needed a nice car, and when those checks aren't coming in no more, that mortgage is still coming, you know, that car note's still coming. So just realizing, you know, you need what you need. You don't need the excess. And speaking on the culture, right now the culture looks like it's so much excess, my bad. And yeah, that's tough, because when you do have that free time and you do have some money in the bank, you don't even think about that money's running out. And when you get a certain amount of money, you're not even seeing it. You know, as an athlete, you know, I just get some financial people and I trust them, and I'm thinking my bank account's good. But now I'm not playing no more and spending the same like I used to, and I'm looking at, I got the time to look at these accounts now. Yeah, no, it's not good.
So that culture of like materialism and excess and capitalism and then more is better, that gets ingrained in the athlete mindset, and you kind of you pursue that and take advantage of that when that opportunity is there, and then when it's not, it changes.
It's taking advantage of you.
It's taking advantage of you. Well said.
And I'll speak to that just from like a football standpoint, because it happens, I feel like, in money sports where people are making money, but the pitfall in football is all the guys are always looking for attention, because nobody sees your face. You see a guy in a cage, basically. You got a helmet on. And so it's like the locker room's a pissing contest. And when I got to San Diego my rookie year, I watched 5 vets sitting there, and they're playing poker for like $5,000 a hand. And like, yeah, so it's not just the cars and it's not just the homes. It's watching that. And then as a young player, you're like, well, you know what? These guys aren't going to keep me out of the game. Now, I never jumped in, but I watched a lot of rookies do it. And you're on a minimum contract in terms of your salary. Your signing bonus is what it is. But that's how people get into that kind of trouble. So as you transition out of sport, for somebody like me, my relationship with money had to change to where, you know, you're not getting the same thing. There was a while there because, you know, you only get paid during the season. So I went January, I got a check in March, and then when I went to OTAs, we were getting a little bit of money, but then I retired. So basically that whole year I hadn't seen like a real check. And so my retirement was like, okay, time to change your relationship with money. But there was the whole basically 8 months before that where I was spending like I was going to be playing the next year. And so like that's where if I could go back in time, I would tell myself to prepare financially just a little bit tighter. And it wasn't anything out of control, but it's something where it's like, it's a little bit regrettable that you lost 8 months of only spending money and not making any. So that was kind of a tough thing where not only do your personal relationships change in the way you think about yourself, but like also the way you think about money and how you spend it has to change too.
I think there's too much of an emphasis on culture. There's a culture of winning at all costs. I think that a while ago, maybe let's say 20, 30, 40 years ago, sports was less commercialized, internationalized, and people did it for fun. It was more for fun. I think now there's just so much money involved, and when there's money involved, then you involve power, politics, and I think the thing that really bugs me is seeing it at the youth level and seeing how the dynamics of sport changes because these coaches are so focused on winning. So I'll take it out of my sport and talk about basketball. And I have a lot of friends or colleagues who are coaches. Maybe they played in the NBA or didn't, but they're seeing it at the AAU level where a lot of these, and Greg, I shouldn't talk about basketball because you could probably talk more about this because but from what I hear is, from some of the parents is that these players aren't being exposed to other positions, and the AAU coaches might be more focused on winning. So everybody is positioned, you know, at the 1, 2, 3 spot, and they learn less about the fundamentals of basketball. And as they go on into college, and then they're not learning the fundamentals of the sport, but also there's not that emphasis on, you know, what sport can be, which is a vehicle to teach them about morale and character and life lessons. And I just think that's the one thing that I've really noticed over the past decade.
Culture of win at all costs, and this culture of we got to start it early. We have this obsession with sport, and it's almost bigger than what it ever used to be in 20, 30 years ago. And so that's trickling down even to the youth level of we got to win, we got to show, we got to have the fancy uniforms. Yep. Mm-hmm. Monica, any thoughts?
A couple. I mean, I guess I can talk about it more from like the smaller sport level, coming from synchro, and where even in the smaller sport, like we see that kind of like money-centric focus. And I think our training hub is in the most expensive part of the United States for USA Synchro. It's in Northern California, and it's becoming more about who can afford to train out there rather than who has the talent to train out there. So if your parents have the money to pay for you to live out there and pay for you to train out there and pay for the expensive coaching, then you're going to be good. So what happens to the girls that can't afford that and are not getting the same level of training and don't have the same amount of opportunity?
Yeah, and I imagine we see that the same thing in tennis.
Oh, it's pretty
Right.
bad, yeah. I mean, actually, we were talking about the grieving process and denial, and what was another one of the stages? Denial and bargaining.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I apparently did not do that 15 years ago, so I came out of retirement to get closure and decided to go play tennis again and tried to play professionally, and I did for 2 years. But, and that was really important because this time I didn't have the support of my family. And I was in between jobs and careers, and I was like, you know what? And thankfully I had the support of my husband. And I was like, I feel like I really need this, you know, in order to get over this hump of like healing and feeling happy with my career. And then one thing I realized is just tennis is so expensive. It's impossible for these kids to support themselves, you know, because it's such an international sport. So then you're flying all the way to Turkey and Poland. And at the professional level, if you win a $10,000 tournament, you get like $1,000. Mm-hmm. And I lost in 3 consecutive tournaments. I lost in qualifying. So then you're paying all this money for hotels and travel and all this stuff, and you're walking away with like nothing. So it is very palpable in tennis.
We're blessed to have, at least on the panelists, we have 2 men and 2 women. So this reality of gender as another culture, I think warrants a bit of discussion too. So how do you think gender shows up in the particular sports that you play as it relates to retirement and how you're viewed as an athlete or former athlete in society?
This one's a little bit of a weird one because, you know, like football is the manly sport, like, you know, everything's macho about it. And I think it's really problematic to approach it from that sense because, I mean, it starts really in high school, but when you get on college, like the campus culture in general it's super hinky. And so you get into these things where, you know, big man on campus and you're trying to pick up girls and X, Y, and Z, locker room talk, all those kinds of things. And so being the man in the locker room who's able to say enough is enough and we're not going to speak about people this way, etc. Like as a male athlete on campus, you're not going to look down upon female scholarship athletes as less than because they worked just as hard to get here, even harder to get here than we did. I think that's a bigger part of the conversation. And so what that leads to a lot of times from my experience is like, you're a loser, you know, like what's wrong with you? You know, you're supposed to be out there chasing, etc. So I think kind of that dynamic, I know, you know, this is a little bit, might not have been the exact question, but like that's mainly what I see is how gender roles in society are kind of magnified as an athlete, where you're in a sport where you're supposed to be manly, so now you're supposed to have the beautiful girl and you're supposed to be chasing, you're supposed to see how many notches you can get on your belt and all that kind of thing. And I think it's something that we need to approach kind of as we're grooming our young athletes to where, you know, the best player in your high school is not getting a pat on the back from everybody and your teachers aren't telling you that, you know, your coaches aren't telling you that you're the hottest thing smoking. And then when you get to college, you don't get to have preferential treatment and, you know, you don't feel like people should be throwing themselves at you because it's just not the way it should be. And athletes definitely have to take the lead on that conversation, which I'm not seeing enough of. But I think it always bothered me just a little bit in terms of how not even the guys who were doing it, but guys who watched and, you know, just sat and saw the things happen, never really spoke up about it.
All right. Mine's like a little bit different, but I kind of want to go off of what Josh was talking about, and that kind of being a student athlete at Ohio State in a big revenue producing sport, you don't talk poorly about women's sports that don't produce revenue. And coming from one of those sports that didn't produce any revenue, I mean, I would like to say that Ohio State has like a really amazing culture, and I never felt like there was that kind of animosity between sports that are producing revenue and sports like mine that were being supported on the revenue that Josh's team made. So I think that was Ohio State's a very special atmosphere where we don't have that kind of power struggle. But I don't think that can be said for the rest of our country and the rest of the world, where he was talking about how you don't speak to women's teams like they're lesser, where I think a lot of that also comes from ourselves. And I know it's not a healthy way to think about it, but I mean, it definitely crossed our minds like, you know, like, oh, we aren't producing revenue, and so we aren't as deserving of the treatment and the preferential treatment that bigger teams are producing. So I think in order to see like that kind of change in our country, it has to start with us, like realizing that you are just as deserving of praise and recognition because you are putting in the same amount of work, if not more in some cases. But I mean, it's a little bit different than a male atmosphere, but I think that's definitely a prominent thing in women's athletic culture.
Well, it's an interesting point. I mean, even in my introduction, I said in order for one to have played football, you have to technically have played. So as a walk-on, there's very much even that kind of difference of how I perceive myself and how the walk-ons perceive themselves as compared to the scholarships. And so you could see that between sports as well, and you could certainly see that within sport between starter, not starter, and how do we talk to ourselves and how do we introduce ourselves as, oh, hi, I'm Monica, the synchro, or, oh, hi, I'm Monica, I happen to do the synchro thing that is also on campus. So there's a big difference in kind of how we communicate that to other people and how other people would expect us to communicate that. Prim or Greg, any other thoughts as far as?
Yeah, I guess when we're talking about gender, I think it's awesome to see. I think that females are coming out and speaking and fighting for what they want. And I think with the changes in strength and conditioning and training, we're seeing the longevity of a lot of female athletes go beyond what we ever knew was possible. You know, we're looking at Serena Williams. She's 37 years old and counting, had a baby, married, nothing stopping her, and she's full speed ahead. Or, you know, there's Victoria Azarenka. She also had a baby, and she's continuing to play professional. I mean, you just go down the list, soccer players, and I think it's really cool to see female athletes continuing their careers beyond college, because when I was playing, it was college or pros. There was no both, because by the time you were 22 in my sport, you were deemed very old. But now it's college is a route to the pros, and I think that's awesome. I think another thing that's really changed is the aesthetics. You know, I think that female athletes are being so celebrated, and the body image conversation is changing. So now you can see the hashtag strong is beautiful or strong is sexy, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So
From my standpoint, it's a little different. I think there is a big problem, and I think it starts from the top. Dr. Bandy's being here opened up my eyes that now that I got a little girl, it's hard for me to find different sports, women's sports on TV. So I try when volleyball championship is on or the women's hockey championship's on, I just make sure those are always on my TV. But during the regular season before the championships come on, you cannot find a women's volleyball game on TV. And so that starts with that. In the NBA, it's tough because it's like you're here and everybody else is here. So the conversation we would have about women was never about, you know, oh, this woman did this, unless it's Michelle Obama. But
Rightfully so.
it was definitely like, you know, you kind of always looked at women as groupies. I mean, it's never talked about, and you understood, you know, somebody's mom or somebody you know who would respect. But for the majority of the part, it was like, oh, shoot, did you hook up with that girl that you saw last night? You're like, dang, she could have been my cousin. She could have been my business manager. But it's never that first. So I think it is a problem there. But I know there's a bunch of people that she's, you know, a lot of hashtags. NBA does one, lean in. And especially with having a daughter, just opening up my eyes. It's more about respecting, you know. And I think that learns at home, you know. When you see a woman, you have to respect her first. You see a man, you have to respect him. Everybody deserves your respect before you move forward with anything.
Very well said. Definitely want to get to some questions. So kind of a final question for the panelists. As athletes who are still in the process of retiring, as we will always be in that process, what do you want from society? And I'll leave it at that.
From society? You can give me some money.
We got an open donation for Greg Oden. Here we now, we did 10, 10, 10, we got a 20, 20, 20, all right, 30 go. That's all you got a Greg Oden for tonight.
Hey, closed mouths don't get fed. No, honestly, just a respect as me, you know. I'm going to be 7 feet tall. I'm always going to look like a basketball player, but I'm a person first. So I guess in society, when you see me, if you want to come up and say hi, I guess come say hi. But I'm Greg Oden. I'm not the basketball player whose knees didn't work on them. And I'm like, okay, I'm at dinner with my wife and daughter. That's nice to meet you too. You know, it's just, I guess it goes back to the respect. You know, looking at us athletes as people rather than just the sport we played.
I agree with that 100%, because a lot of times when I meet people I've never met before, or I'll be checking out at the store, somebody will look at me and be like, oh my gosh, you must have played sports. And I'll be like, no, I'm a damn engineer. Like the first thing you say to somebody shouldn't be that they look like they play sports because they look like an athlete. And I understand where you're coming from, but like, even though I was an athlete, I am much more than an athlete. And it's just that awareness, all the causes that we're involved in, et cetera. For us, I think it's appreciated when people take interest in those other aspects. And then the other one, just as like a black male, one of my pet peeves is, you know, when somebody meets me and after talking to me, they say, oh my gosh, you're so well spoken. And it sounds like a compliment, but to me, that's like coded language. Like you looked at me and thought, okay, big black dude, played sports, can't talk. And so it's just like from society, those are things that we would appreciate is look at me like the first time you've met me and respect me like somebody who deserves anybody else's respect. Not only as my athletic accomplishments or not as what you think I am supposed to be. Like, you know, respect us as humans that deserve respect just the same way you would want it.
Yeah, I mean, I think going on top of that, I think it's just, I would want to remind society that athletes should not be objectified. And it's really important, especially when they're younger, as they're going through the developmental processes of not only being an athlete, but as a child, that we coach them and we parent them as a whole. So we don't just look at them, and this is probably the message more to coaches, is we don't look at them as just an athlete. We have to consider their personality, their feelings, their emotions, their goals outside of sport, everything. And I think the moment that we start treating and coaching and caring for athletes from a holistic standpoint, we're gonna start seeing some major strides in sports.
Yeah, I would just have to echo all of that. The same thing for thinking of athletes as people. I mean, I have the same experiences, kind of, but people come and be like, grab my shoulders, like, oh, you must have been a swimmer. I'm like, you don't need to touch me, and I am aware. So yeah, just that same thing. Like, I am a person before I was a swimmer, or a former synchronized swimmer. And then just also, I think we are seeing a lot of like progress in this, but also seeing female athletes as just athletes. You don't need to define her as a female athlete. She's an athlete. So I think even though we are starting to get more recognition, it's still problematic that we need to separate women as female athletes instead of just athletes. So I think we are seeing a lot of progress in that, but I mean, there's obviously still a lot of momentum that we can take with that.
Wow. More than an athlete, no doubt. Such rich conversation from you all, incredible perspectives, and something that I know I've learned it for, maybe it's the psychologist in me, but this, even witnessing this kind of felt a bit therapeutic for many of us, if not all of us, just to be able to hear one another engage in this conversation about the very real reality and process associated with retirement and sport and society. And so for that, I thank you. But before we do high fives and hug it out, I do want to be able to open it up to the audience. We got about 20 minutes. I like to offer it as not asking questions, but what really struck you as some curiosities that now that you have these incredible folks in front of you that you may want to have the opportunity to ask. Yeah. Both.
So I think we shouldn't run from our athletic achievements because these are special things that happen. But to your point, one thing I see when I go to speak places, they'll ask me for a bio or what kind of title I want next to my name. And oftentimes I'll tell them put founder and CEO of the Joshua Perry Family Foundation. But a lot of times next to that, they'll put, you know, former All Big Ten player, former national champion, etc. And I never told you to put that. And I appreciate that accolade, but that's not what I identify as. So I think it's special just because of how much pride people have in the university and those achievements. But at the same time, I think for us, like, we've heard it enough to want people to be like, okay, yes, like, we did all of those things, but we are individual people that do other things, and we have other accomplishments that we're proud of as well.
I think one thing to consider, I agree with you, I agree with Josh that it's both and it's twofold. But I think that the one thing to keep in mind is that as human beings, our way of processing and remembering and connecting is slapping labels on people. So it's like, you know, that they could say, oh, you know, the amazing rower from whatever, but we'll also look to somebody else and say, like, oh, they're from New York City, or oh, they're from the Midwest, or oh, they're from California, or she's an engineer, or whatever, you know. And I think it happens in other scenarios, and I think that's just one thing to keep in mind. And if that, for some reason, and I can understand because it has bugged me as well, where you're like, oh, that's all I am, I'm just an athlete. The other way to think about it is, well, I could not have been an athlete, and then you get the pleasure and you get the reminder that you were an amazing athlete. And so that's, you know, because it could have been something else that wasn't that. So.
Well, I think it's a lot more about how you feel about yourself, because you got to respect yourself and realize you are more than the athlete. But, I mean, I've met a whole bunch of legends who they love hearing about themselves. And, you know, they want you to go down their list. And so it's like, I think you just got to feel it like, okay, you know, yes, I did do those things, but I'm also more than that. And when you can accept that and when you can see it, that stuff wouldn't bother you as much.
I would just echo Greg and everything that's been said. I think it's both, and I think you're recognizing someone for something extraordinary they did athletically, but I think we do a really poor job of listening to people, and like Josh said, like, he wanted to be recognized for his amazing foundation. You know, he did not want to have the athletic label put on that specific, I don't know if it was a speech you were at or something, but we need to listen to people. Like, if they want to be recognized, if they want to have those kind of accolades spoken about, then do it, and if they don't, then don't.
This has been a great discussion, so I'm not trying to minimize what has been said at all. But the Olympics went from being like an amateur thing to being professional. And there's so much a contribution from athletes to the university, and especially like football here, and it raises a lot of revenue. And the athletes don't see any of that as students. Is there any feeling here, or is this too far aside, that should athletes in college actually get paid for being athletes in college, even beyond their scholarship?
Well, Greg said, he asked if we could go R. So, I mean, we're on the trust tree, and you're all going to sign little, like, non-disclosures before you leave here anyway. But, yeah, what's your take on that? It certainly has value as far as we think of sport and society, retirement, and what's going to be left on the table if we do. Athletes get paid. What are your thoughts?
I think, yes, they should get paid. I think a stipend for every athlete on scholarship, but then I also allow the athletes to use their own likeness. So, okay, the thing is, okay, if the lower sport, I guess, to a university, and then the #1 football player is getting the same stipend, how can you differentiate that? Let him be able to sell himself, make money on himself. I mean, I know it's going to take a little bit from the university, but is it really? So that's my thought process. It just hit me last week, too. So.
This is fresh from the mind of Greg.
I was asked that question recently.
I like it. Fresh from the mind.
I agree with Greg. I think there's so much gray area to it, and if you are to try and regulate it, it's going to be very hard. But I think if you are to keep the scholarship and stipend the same across all athletes that are on scholarship, I think that's great because you can maintain that equity, especially among all the athletes are putting in the same amount of work, and the same amount of recognition should be given to all of them. And then, I mean, obviously Josh is going to be much more recognizable than me. So if he is making money off of his name and his image and his likeness, I mean, I can't do anything about that, and I feel like it's his right to, you know, profit off of what he does and how much work he puts into that.
Yeah, I'm in the same thought process, especially at a university like Ohio State where there's a lot of money flowing around. You look at a Nike contract, I think like $250 million or something crazy like that. You know, there's money to do it. I have a friend who she played field hockey at Harvard, and as a summer internship came up with an investment vehicle that would be useful to student athletes, so they'd be able to put the money away for them. It would accrue interest, and then when they were ready, whether it was a down payment for a home, they were paying for grad school or whatever expense they had, they could withdraw the money. And I think that's a fantastic solution because a lot of people will tell you that 18 to 22-year-olds are very irresponsible with money and they probably don't need it, especially as, like, you know, we complain on scholarship, but at the end of the day, we were pretty well taken care of. So I wouldn't have had very much use for, you know, windfall of money at the time, but right now I would definitely appreciate it. So I think things like that are important. The other thing to look at, too, at Ohio State is I feel like people don't like to say it, but everybody here benefits from great sports programs. When you look at just attracting students in the first place, like a lot of people come here because they want to be a part of Big Ten championship runs, etc. You look at the licensing deal that the university has, where 85% of licensing goes back to the university, only 15% goes back to the athletic department, but a lot of that comes from Nike apparel, etc. Like, there are a lot of benefits, and so to be able to maybe see some of that shift toward student athletes, I think we would all like that.
Yeah, I pretty much, I think we're all on the same page. Just coming from the media space, it's a conversation and discussion that we have it feels like every single day, you know, and it's going to be a long battle between the NCAA and the athletes. But yeah, I think there should be some sort of compromise. You know, I think that on one hand, looking back at my athletic experience, getting sponsored, free gear, free tuition. At the time, it's $40,000. Now it's up to $70,000 a year. It's crazy. Dorm, food, and then even some additional stuff for books and rent. I actually came out a little bit with a profit, but I think that there should be the opportunity for some of the bigger name sports and athletes, football, basketball, to get a piece of the pie from their likeness.
Thanks. Good question. Yeah.
I'm Joe. I'm Monica's brother.
What up, Joe?
Yeah. I'm not as great of an athlete as her, but I actually have a question. It's kind of for all of you guys, but going back to Josh's point, I like the comment that you made about everyone thinking about you, like, initially, like, being well-spoken and that sort of thing. I know all of you guys are other people on the panel. I think that's very cool. But I just want to, like, ask you guys, like, did you guys have any problems getting into the sport and being successful, coming from minority, and also, like, culturally, how do we change that?
Great question. Yeah. All right, Joe.
Family is
Absolutely,
here.
man. Yeah, cool.
So I don't think I had any trouble necessarily getting in. For me, it was always a little bit different. Like, I grew up in Lewis Center, Olentangy School, so it's very white. So I always stuck out a little bit. And I always was accustomed to sticking out and embracing that uniqueness. I think just from some of the work I've done with my charity, some kids do struggle because the opportunities aren't there. Like, our schools are very well funded. We have a ton of athletic programs within the school. We have other athletic programs that people can send their kids to. Like, we have people who pay for their kids to row. That's a hell of an investment because it's not cheap. We have kids who ride horses. Again, horses aren't cheap. So in other areas that are primarily people of color, a lot of those opportunities don't exist. So I think finding a way to combat that is important. But I'm glad you asked that question because I was in the NFL during the time of the national anthem protests, and that was kind of a really wacky time. And just personally, I think a lot of it was misconstrued. The narrative was hijacked. I wrote a Bleacher Report editorial piece about it, just talking about what we felt as players and kind of the solutions that we saw. But in saying that, I feel like sports has always been a great platform for people of color to be able to speak up about injustices and issues that they see throughout the communities and nationwide. Because a lot of times you're not going to be able to have a microphone in your face to talk about those things, or reporters asking you questions. And so I think it is really important to have figures like this where you can be in a setting where people are receptive and they're listening, and you can disseminate messages about some of the injustices that you've seen or the inequalities. You can have ladies up here talking about how gender has played a factor into what their experience was like in sport. I think is really important. So the conversation has to continue. I think people have to get more comfortable with it, but athletes need to go ahead and run away with that, because you're helping out your communities, you're helping out your other athletes, and I think it's really important to talk about.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that most of my struggle with being someone of color in sport came mostly from myself. Being half Puerto Rican in a very white sport, synchro, I always thought of myself as very different, and it was very hard for me sometimes just to be looking around the pool and nobody looked like me. And I know there are bigger issues in the world, but that was more of an internal issue that I had to deal with. But I think it made me a stronger person and made me really just love my heritage and be able to represent Puerto Ricans, and there aren't very many in synchro, so I think that's pretty neat, and just be able to represent my culture. But I think the biggest issue that I face being a marginalized group in sport is just being a woman in sport. And just even if it's just jokes or snide remarks from people that weren't as respectful, just being women aren't athletes. Even if it's a joke, it still hits home, and it's not something to make light of or joke around about, as we put in just as much work as other people. And then when we were at World Championships in 2017, we were in Hungary, and a reporter, the main story of that day was synchro, and it was just a picture of girls' butts on the front page of the, I don't know, whatever they wrote up that day of the World Championships, and they said it's easy to find beauty in this sport. And how does that reflect on women that are there working their asses off to win a national championship, And that was the first time I've been so proud of synchro, where we come from just a very respectful and refined group of people, and we don't lash out on that kinds of thing. And we saw just a lot of women in sport just posting it on Facebook, posting it on Instagram, saying this is not right, even if it's not a very recognizable sport. You're still putting this out into the world, and people are still seeing that. So I thought that was very awesome to see my sport kind of step up and say this isn't right, and that's not how you report on us.
I think everybody has a different experience because every sport has its own culture. Tennis is a very internationalized sport, so I was lucky that I was surrounded by all sorts of different genders, ethnicities, cultures, colors. I was born in Missouri, so I was probably one of 3 Asians in the state of Missouri, and the other 3 were my family. But then I was lucky where, so I did struggle with that a little bit, but then when I was 12 and I moved to Florida, people at my school, we had people from New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Tokyo, Guam, South America, the Caribbean. So I got really lucky in that. I guess I have a question for you, and the fact that you raised that issue, do you feel that you are being challenged in integrating your sport because of your ethnicity or culture? And if so, I guess that's disconcerting to me.
I'm actually not an athlete here at LSU. I'm just a freshman. Just regular student. But I wouldn't say necessarily in high school, sports with me, that was the concern. But I would say kind of the opposite actually, because I'm getting into competitive bodybuilding and that sort of thing. And I think kind of on the contrary, kind of people are aspiring to go after being the darkest person that they can be, and I don't know, kind of contrary, kind of flipping sides and wanting to go after and aspire to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the beauty about sports is that they're, for the most part, it blurs the lines in terms of ethnicity, culture, color. You can find commonalities with each other. At least it was in my sport. It didn't matter where you came from. It was a very, there was a lot of harmony, But I will say that for anybody that faces those challenges in sport, that's just a little piece of the pie that you're going to face in the real world, because it gets a lot worse. Because when I transitioned and I got into the real world and I was trying to get into sports broadcasting, and then it's one of the most superficial businesses that you'll ever encounter. And at the time, you know, this was 15 years ago, and a lot of people were like, well, so you're a female, you might pose some challenges, you don't really know enough about sports. Prim Saripapat, that's not an American name, you're gonna have to change your name because it's not memorable, it's not Americanized enough, you have long hair. At the time, everybody had short hair, so they're like, you're gonna have to cut your hair, it's too long and sexy and messy and all this stuff. And I'm like, so you're basically telling me not to be myself. That's awesome, you know? So I guess that's why I posed that question to you, because if you felt those challenges, then I would be concerned, because in the real world, the lines are still very defined, and there is a lot of segregation in politics.
From basketball, where it's mostly African American dominated, you see the athletes and you're like, this is not a problem. But once you get to that higher level and you get into those rooms that we all know about, you're the athlete in there, and everybody who has the power is not of your color. So the tough part with guys, well, that's not a tough part, but guys like Jordan, who started, but LeBron, who aspires and said this, I want to own a team. Like, that's his own, like, that's his mindset. He's letting everybody know that. So I think, for one, we need more athletes to come back and be coaches to the youth in the middle level, just to show guys who know, women who know, to give their perspective and show them how to maneuver this world, because those rooms is really not run by you. And even at the youth level, when I came up, you know, everybody was on the court, but now it's getting so much privatized. You don't even see people on those basketball courts that used to be on the side of the road. You know, everybody's in the gym, everybody's getting worked out. And if you realize the people of color, we don't have that money to pay for this scholarship or this membership to this arena. So one thing I would say is just having more athletes come back and give back to help you maneuver the situation and actually teach the sport the right way, because a lot of times the real talent will show even if you're not in those worlds of money and privatization.
Well, I know that we had a question over here, and this may take us a little bit past 4, and I was a little bit nervous when Nicole said, you have an hour and a half to moderate a panel. I'm like, an hour and a half? It's like 4 episodes of Seinfeld. That's going to be that's tall order. And now I wish we had an hour and a half more. You know, frankly, we really filled the time. But I can't plead ignorant. I want to be able to sleep tonight if I pretended that I didn't see my man's hand over here. So we'll have my man over here be the final question of the day, and then we'll wrap up.
We'll get you out of here quick.
Yeah, still dealing with it. Just by asking that question, it kind of hit me a little bit. You know, and it's just like, yeah, that's the realization. You just got to deal with it. The first thing is just being comfortable with yourself and realizing your path is your path. You know, if it's meant for you, it's going to happen. So to enjoy every day and live your life and try not to worry about that is very tough, because it does hurt, especially for me, because I got out the league right before the TV contract hit. So, you know, minimum for me is 1.2. Now minimum is 2.1 million. I mean, that could have helped, you know? So really, it's just being comfortable with yourself, because, you know, what's going to happen for you is going to happen for you. But if you're happy with yourself and you're enjoying life, whatever is planned for you is going to come to you.
So I was realistic about what my athletic career was going to look like. I always figured myself as a guy who could probably stay in the league for 8 to 10 years if I was healthy, but I was probably going to be one of the minimum contract guys. I wasn't expecting to sign a big multi-year deal. So just kind of with that, to be honest, like my vision of what my lifestyle would have been had I played that long and what it's going to be now hasn't changed very much. And it's because I'm confident in my skills and my abilities that I learned here in school. I'm confident in my ability to leverage my network and meet people. And I wasn't going to be the guy who was going to live in $1 million home. I like nice cars, but I wasn't going to buy anything too crazy. Like I was going to be a guy who was going to go back to the same suburb I grew up in. I was going to live a very nice middle-class lifestyle in my mind, and I still have the ability to do that. So for me, like, obviously I wish I could have had that money. It would have been fantastic, but in my mind, I could make up a lot of what I wanted to be able to live the same type of lifestyle I want to live.
Panels are only as good as your panelists. And I've had the great fortune of sitting in an audience where the panel discussion is so boring and you wish it would end, and it's like, how do you like make the panel exciting? And you make the panel exciting by having incredible panelists with incredible stories, with incredible perspectives about their stories in the narratives at large. So with that, I want to give a very huge round of applause. And key takeaways, you're each going to have your own, but at the end of the day, sport is messy, it's clunky, retirement is messy and clunky, and so is life. And I think that is what makes sport, one of the many benefits of sport, is that it's this brief little microcosm and playground of how we find out we respond to difficult situations, how we respond to great situations, how we interact with people that we're in competition with, how we interact with people that we're not in competition with, how we receive feedback, how we give feedback. Sport is a microcosm of that, which then allows us, after retirement and while we're still playing, to be able to engage in the society as rock star, incredible individuals. And I think these four folks are a testament to that. So I thank you all for the time. I thank you, Nicole, for the opportunity for this panel to be here. And once again, let's hear it one more time for this group of individuals.